The battlefield was broken and full of smoke. The sky above was dark with fire and ash. The alien princess stood in the center of the ruins, holding her long spear tightly in her trembling hands. Her people were gone, her army destroyed, and only the enemy remained. They surrounded her from every side, their armor shining red under the burning sky. The princess's heart was heavy, but her spirit still tried to fight. She had sworn to protect her land, even if she had to die alone. She charged forward with her spear, striking at the first soldier. The enemy roared in anger and raised their blades. Metal clashed against metal, sparks flying with every strike. The princess fought with everything she had, her arms aching, her lungs burning. But there were too many, and she was only one. The enemy laughed at her weakness, their voices echoing across the battlefield like cruel thunder. One soldier struck her weapon hard, and the spear cracked. She gasped, swinging it again. But the wood snapped in two. The broken spear fell from her hands, leaving her unarmed. Her knees felt weak, her body shaking from exhaustion. The circle of enemies closed tighter around her. Blades pointed at her chest. For the first time, the princess felt true despair. Her last hope was gone, her weapon destroyed, her body failing. She whispered a prayer to the old stars above her. People believed the stars watched over them. But tonight, the stars were silent. Her eyes filled with tears as she fell to her knees. The enemy raised their weapons high, ready to strike the final blow. The battlefield grew quiet, as if even the world waited for her end. And then, the sky itself broke. A thunderous sound shook the earth, and light ripped across the heavens. Every soldier turned their head upward in shock. A burning streak cut through the dark clouds, brighter than any star. It crashed down with unstoppable force, fire and smoke exploding across the battlefield. The ground shook like an earthquake, throwing soldiers back to the dirt. The princess shielded her face as the blast of heat rolled over her. When she opened her eyes, she saw something standing in the smoke. It was not an alien soldier, not one of her kind. It was a man, a human, tall and scarred. His eyes sharp like steel. His clothes were torn, his body marked with battles she could not imagine. But he stood strong, like a wall against the storm. The soldiers laughed, thinking him weak and foolish. Just one man? They mocked, "Is this the savior from the skies?" But the princess saw something different in him. He was calm, fearless, unshaken by the army around him. The human stepped forward slowly. He bent down and picked up the broken half of her spear. He turned it in his hands as if it was still a weapon of power. His eyes met hers, and for a moment she felt a strange strength flow through her heart. The despair that had crushed her spirit began to fade. The human raised the broken spear like it was a sword. He faced the army alone and spoke with a voice steady and strong. "You will not touch her," he said. His words carried across the battlefield like thunder. The soldiers shouted in anger and charged at him. But the princess, still on her knees, felt something she had not felt in many years. She felt hope. The battle was not yet over. The princess's last stand had become something more. For in her darkest hour, when her spear shattered in despair, a human had crashed down from the heavens to save her. The battlefield was still burning. From the crash, the soldiers struggled to stand, dust and smoke filling the air. In the center of the chaos stood the human, holding only the broken piece of the princess's spear. He looked small compared to the towering alien warriors, but his presence filled the space like fire. The princess watched him with wide eyes, unable to believe what she saw. A human, here, in the middle of her dying world, standing as if he belonged to no one and feared nothing. The enemy soldiers began to laugh, their voices cruel and sharp. "What is this creature?" One sneered, pointing his blade. "Some lost wanderer who fell from the sky?" Another mocked. "He has no armor, no weapon, no strength," they shouted. But the human did not move. He did not tremble. His gaze was steady, his breath calm, his stance like stone planted deep in the earth. The leader of the alien soldiers stepped forward, his armor black as night. He raised his sword and pointed it at the human. "You will die quickly, little creature," he growled. But the human only lifted the broken spear, holding it like a sword. His eyes flickered with something the princess had not seen in years. It was not just bravery, it was defiance, a refusal to break. The soldiers charged with a roar, their blades flashing in the firelight. The human moved fast, faster than the eye could follow. He slid between two attackers, using their weight against them. The broken spear struck like lightning, not with brute power, but with precision. A soldier fell. His own blade turned against him. Another swung, but the human twisted aside, striking his leg and sending him crashing to the ground. The princess could hardly breathe as she watched. This man, this fragile-looking being, was fighting an army with nothing but will and skill. Every movement was sharp, every strike exact. He fought not like a soldier trained in drills, but like a survivor who had faced death countless times and learned to master it. The alien warriors grew angrier, striking harder, faster, trying to overwhelm him. But the human never stopped moving, never stopped fighting. The ground around him became littered with fallen enemies. The princess's despair began to turn into awe. She had been trained since birth to fight, to lead, to protect her people. And yet here was someone not of her world, standing alone against death itself. Her broken spirit began to rise, not because of his strength, but because of his will. He was one man, but he fought as if the fate of the stars was in his hands. The leader of the soldiers roared in rage and charged forward. His sword cut the air like fire. The human blocked with the broken spear, sparks flying as steel met shattered wood. The princess cried out, thinking it would break again. But the human did not falter. He pushed back, twisting, turning, using the enemy's own power to throw him down. The leader fell hard, his helmet rolling across the dirt, his pride shattered. The battlefield grew silent. The remaining soldiers hesitated, looking at each other, fear creeping into their eyes. The human lowered the broken spear and stood tall among the ruins. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but his spirit burned brighter than the flames around them. He turned to the princess, his eyes meeting hers once more. In that moment, no words were needed. But he spoke anyway, his voice steady and firm. "You are not alone," he said. The princess felt her heart tremble, not with fear, but with something she had thought lost. Hope. The man had come from the heavens, not as a god, not as a savior, born of legend, but as a human who refused to let her die in despair. And though the battle was not finished, though the world around them was still falling apart, the princess knew her story was no longer hers alone, for now it was their fight. Together. The air was heavy with silence after the clash. The enemy soldiers who had mocked the human now stepped back in fear. They had expected an easy kill, a fragile creature crushed in moments. Instead, they had watched their strongest leader thrown to the ground by nothing more than a man with half a broken spear. The princess still knelt on the dirt, her body weak, but her eyes locked on him. She had seen warriors fight before. She had fought herself. She had led armies into battle. But this was something different, something beyond logic. The human fought, not with strength of muscle, but with strength of mind. He read every movement of his enemies before they even struck. He turned their weight, their speed, their anger into weapons against themselves. The remaining soldiers shouted in rage, trying to shake off their fear. They attacked together, their blades shining under the fire-lit sky. The human moved like water flowing between rocks, smooth, unbroken, unstoppable. One soldier swung high, but the human ducked and drove the broken spear into his stomach. Another came from behind, but he twisted aside, letting the enemy stab his own comrade. The battlefield became a storm of confusion. Soldiers cutting each other in their frenzy, and the human in the middle, calm, sharp, deadly. The princess could not look away. Every strike of his weapon seemed impossible, every dodge timed to perfection. It was as if he had lived this battle 1,000 times in his mind. The enemy shouted in frustration, their numbers turning against them. They tripped over each other, crashed into each other, their blades missing their marks. The human's face remained cold, his jaw set, his eyes burning with a fire that could not be broken. A soldier screamed and charged with a spear twice the length of the broken weapon in the human's hand. The princess gasped, certain this would be the end. But the human sidestepped, caught the shaft of the spear with one hand, and yanked it forward. The soldier fell headlong into the dirt, and the human used his own weapon to strike him down. It was not brute strength that won the fight. It was precision, it was patience, it was survival. The princess felt her heart pounding. She had thought herself doomed when her own spear shattered. She had thought her story would end in despair. Yet here was someone proving that a broken weapon did not mean defeat. Here was someone showing her that the mind could be sharper than any blade. And though her body was weak, her spirit began to rise again, for the first time since the battle began. She wanted to stand, she wanted to fight. The last soldiers hesitated, sweat shining under their helmets. The human looked at them, his voice steady, his tone like stone. "Run," he said. His single word carried more weight than 1,000 threats. Some of them did run, their fear too great to hide, but a few stayed, bound by pride and shame. They raised their weapons once more, but their movements were slower, their strikes weaker, and the human cut them down with swift, merciless precision. When the last body fell, the battlefield grew quiet again. The human stood still, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling. The broken spear in his hand was stained with blood and ash. Around him lay the remains of an army that had thought itself invincible. The princess stared, her lips trembling, her eyes wide with disbelief. She could not understand how one man had done this. It was a fight beyond logic, beyond reason, but it was real, and she had witnessed it with her own eyes. The human finally turned to her, his gaze softening. He walked toward her slowly, his steps steady despite his wounds. He held out his hand, offering to lift her up. For a moment she hesitated, her pride whispering that she did not need saving, but her heart told her the truth. She would not be standing if not for him. She placed her hand in his, and he pulled her gently to her feet. "You are not broken," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "You are stronger than you think." The princess felt her strength returning, not in her body, but in her spirit. The battle was not just about her survival anymore. It was about something greater, something she could not yet name. The human had turned despair into hope, weakness into defiance, and though she did not yet know why he had come from the heavens, she knew this. He was not her enemy. He was the reason she still lived. The night came quickly after the battle. The flames of the ruined battlefield still burned in the distance, sending smoke into the sky. The princess walked beside the human, her steps slow, her body heavy, but her spirit slowly finding strength again. They moved away from the dead, away from the ruins, into the broken forests where shadows whispered between the trees. For a long time neither of them spoke. The human walked with steady silence, always alert, his eyes scanning the darkness as if danger could rise from anywhere. The princess wanted to ask who he was, why he came, and how he fought like no one she had ever seen. But her voice trembled each time she tried. She was a princess, trained to command, yet with him she felt more like a student standing beside a master of survival. Finally, the silence broke. "You should not have been left there," the human said quietly, his tone sharp but not cruel. The princess turned her head toward him, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. He stopped, looking at her with eyes that carried weight she could not yet understand. "They knew," he said. "Your own people knew you were going to die, and they let it happen." The words struck her harder than any blade. Her chest tightened, her heart racing with disbelief. She shook her head, refusing to accept it. "No," she whispered. "My people would never abandon me. I am their princess, their leader, their shield." But the human's expression did not change. He spoke with calm certainty. As if he had seen betrayal too many times before. "Armies do not vanish by accident," he said. "They left you as bait, a sacrifice to slow the enemy while they fled." The princess's knees weakened, her hand gripping the bark of a tree to steady herself. Her mind replayed the moments before the battle, the orders given, the looks in the eyes of her generals. Had there been hesitation? Had there been fear? Had there been something more? Her throat tightened as the truth began to creep into her thoughts. The human's voice cut through the storm inside her. "I have seen this before. Rulers abandoned by their own people when hope fades." He said, "It is not weakness in you. It is fear in them." Tears stung the princess's eyes, but she did not want to show them. Her pride screamed against the thought of betrayal. Her heart wanted to believe her people had fought bravely until the end. But deep inside, the cracks of doubt grew, and the more she thought, the more she realized how quickly her army had vanished, how suddenly she had been left alone. Her spirit shook, not from the enemy's blades, but from the wound of betrayal. The human watched her in silence, giving her space he did not reach out to comfort her, for he knew that wounds of the heart could not be healed with simple words. Instead, he spoke one truth, firm and steady. "You are not alone anymore." The princess looked up at him, her tears catching in the faint light of the stars. She wanted to ask why he cared, why a man not of her world would choose to stand beside her, but his eyes gave no answer, only a reflection of his own scars, his own history of being left behind. The forest around them grew darker, the sounds of creatures echoing in the night. The princess wiped her face, forcing her tears away. She could not fall apart now, not when she had seen how he fought, not when she had seen his fire. If he could stand against death itself, then she too could rise against betrayal. Her despair began to change into something else. It became anger. A quiet, sharp anger that burned beneath her skin. Not at him, not at the enemy, but at the shadow of treachery that had stolen her faith. The human nodded slightly, as if he could feel the shift inside her. "Good," he said softly. "Let it make you stronger." They continued deeper into the forest, the broken spear still in his hand, the weight of betrayal heavy in her heart. The path ahead was full of danger, she knew, but now she also knew something more. Her fight was no longer only against the enemies who wanted her dead. It was also against the traitors who had abandoned her. The night carried their footsteps into the unknown, and in the shadows of betrayal, the bond between the human and the princess began to grow. The forest stretched endlessly before them. Twisted trees rose like shadows, their branches curling into claws against the pale moons. The princess walked beside the human, her mind heavy with betrayal, her body aching from battle. Every step felt uncertain, but she did not fall, because the human walked with steady resolve, guiding her through the darkness. Behind them, the ruined battlefield was not silent. The enemy had not been destroyed completely. Some had fled into the night, carrying news of their failure. Soon more soldiers would come, hunters searching for the princess who should have died. The human knew this, his sharp eyes never leaving the shadows around them. Every sound of cracking branches, every whisper of the wind, he treated as danger. The princess realized he was not only a warrior, he was a survivor, always one step ahead of death. They moved swiftly through the trees, their path lit only by the faint glow of burning stars above. The princess's breath came in shallow gasps, her strength fading, but she forced herself to keep pace. Her pride would not allow her to stumble in front of him. Even though her body cried out for rest, she pushed forward, step by step. Human finally stopped near a fallen tree, his voice calm. "We will rest here for a short time," he said. The princess sank to the ground, her chest rising and falling as if she had been running for days. She looked at him in silence, trying to understand him. Why had he come? Why had he saved her? No one from her own world had stood beside her, yet this man, not of her people, had risked everything. She opened her mouth to ask, but the sound of rustling leaves cut her words. The human raised his hand for silence, his body low, his eyes locked on the shadows. From between the trees, figures emerged, tall, armored, their eyes glowing with cruel light. The enemy had found them, faster than expected. The princess gripped her fists, ready to fight with her bare hands if needed. But the human only tightened his hold on the broken spear and stepped forward. The soldiers hissed in their alien tongue, spreading to surround them. The human glanced at the princess, his voice low. "Stay behind me," he said. Before she could argue, the first soldier lunged forward. Blades slicing through the air, the human moved like a shadow, catching the strike, twisting the weapon free and striking with lethal precision. The forest echoed with the clash of steel, the cries of enemies, and the sound of his unrelenting will. The princess watched in awe, anger still burning in her heart, but now mixed with something else. Trust. When the last soldier fell, silence returned once more, broken only by the distant cries of night creatures. The human wiped the blood from his weapon, his breathing steady though his body carried wounds. The princess stepped closer, her voice soft but unyielding. "Why do you fight for me?" she asked. He looked at her, his eyes carrying the weight of unspoken truths. "Because no one deserves to be left behind," he said. The words struck her deeply, reminding her of the betrayal she carried, but also giving her strength. She nodded slowly, realizing that his fight was not only for her, but for something greater. They moved again through the forest, deeper into the unknown. The path grew darker, the air colder, but their steps did not falter. The princess no longer walked as a broken figure waiting for death. She walked as someone who carried hope, fragile but alive. Beside her was a man who had fallen from the heavens, not by chance but by choice, and though she did not yet know his full story, she knew one truth. Together, they could defy the fate her enemies had chosen for her. Together, they could turn despair into defiance. The night stretched on, endless and cruel, but with each step, the bond between the human and the princess grew stronger. The flight through darkness was no longer just an escape, it was the beginning of something greater, something that would change both their worlds forever. The forest finally thinned after hours of endless walking. The trees gave way to a clearing where the sky stretched wide, filled with broken moons and scattered stars. The princess stopped, her chest rising with heavy breaths, staring up at the heavens she had once prayed to. But now those heavens held questions she could not answer, and standing beside her was the only one who might know. The human sat near a fallen stone, his back straight, his hand resting on the broken spear. His face was calm, but his eyes carried shadows deeper than the night around them. The princess wanted to ask again, the question that had haunted her since the moment he appeared. "Why did you come?" she whispered, her voice trembling between pride and desperation. This time the human did not stay silent. "I was watching," he said, his tone steady, though his words carried weight like iron. The princess frowned, her heart quickening. "Watching?" she repeated, as if the word itself felt strange. "Yes," he answered, his gaze lifting to the fractured moons. "I was not sent here by your people, nor by chance. I came because I could not stand to see it happen again." Her hands clenched at her sides, her voice breaking through the silence. "See what happened again?" she demanded. The human's eyes darkened, filled with memories she could not yet see. "Abandonment," he said softly. "Betrayal, the weak left to die so the strong can save themselves." The words struck her heart like a blade, for they mirrored the wound already burning within her. But he continued, his voice quiet but unyielding. "I know what it feels like, to be cast aside, to be left behind, to be told you are nothing more than a sacrifice." The princess froze, staring at him, her breath caught in her chest. She had thought he was only a warrior, only a fighter who had crashed from the sky. But now she realized he carried scars she could not see, scars not of the body, but of the soul. He had lived the same pain she had felt. He had carried the same despair, and in saving her, he was defying the chains of his own past. She stepped Closer, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. "Your world," she asked, "did this to you?" The human's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he looked into the distance. "My world, my people, my leaders," he said. "They left us to die in battles they would not fight themselves. They called it honor, they called it duty, but it was only betrayal." His hand tightened around the broken spear, his knuckles pale in the moonlight. "I swore then, never again. If I saw it happen, if I could stop it, I would." The princess felt her chest ache with something she did not want to name. This man, this stranger, had come not as a savior of legend, but as a survivor of tragedy. He had chosen to fight for her, not because of who she was, but because of what he had endured. His scars mirrored her own, and in his defiance, she saw a reflection of herself. For the first time she understood. He was not just a protector, he was a warning. He was proof of what betrayal could create. A warrior forged in pain, a fire born from abandonment. The silence stretched between them, heavy yet alive with unspoken truths. The princess looked down, her voice quiet but steady. "Then we are the same," she said. Her words surprised even herself, but when she spoke them, she knew they were true. He turned his head toward her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes softer now. "Perhaps," he said, but in that single word, there was an acknowledgement, a bond neither of them could deny. The night wind swept across the clearing, carrying the scent of ash and earth. The human stood, his figure tall against the broken moons. "We cannot stay here," he said, his voice strong again. "They will keep hunting, they will not stop." The princess nodded, her spirit burning brighter than before. She no longer walked as a broken leader filled with despair. She walked as someone who had found her mirror in the most unlikely of places. The human secret was no longer a mystery. It was a promise, a vow born from scars, a vow that tied their fates together. And as they stepped back into the darkness, their path uncertain but their bond unshaken, the princess felt something she had not felt since before the betrayal. She felt that maybe, just maybe, this fight was not hers alone anymore. For in the secret of the human, she had found her own strength reflected back at her. The horizon began to glow with the faint light of morning. The broken moons faded as the first rays of a new dawn stretched across the land. The princess and the human stood at the edge of the forest, looking toward the smoking ruins of her kingdom. The air smelled of ash and betrayal, but it also carried something else, the promise of change. The princess gripped her fists, her eyes sharp, no longer clouded with despair. She had lost her army, she had lost her people's faith, but she had not lost herself. And now she was not alone. Beside her stood the human, scarred and relentless, holding the broken spear as if it were still whole. His presence was unshaken, a silent force that gave her strength. "They will come again," the human said, his voice steady. "They will not stop until you are gone." The princess nodded, her jaw firm. "Then let them come," she replied. "But this time, they will not face a broken princess. They will face defiance." The human looked at her, and for the first time since they had met, a faint smile touched his lips. It was not the smile of victory, nor of joy, but of recognition. He saw in her what he had once been, a survivor forged by betrayal. And now, together, they would not only survive, they would rise. The princess turned toward the ruined city in the distance, her voice clear. "My people must see," she said. "They must know I still live. They must know I was not broken by their betrayal." The human tilted his head, his eyes sharp. "They may not welcome you," he warned. "Those who abandoned you may fear you now." She breathed deeply, her gaze hardening. "Let them fear me," she whispered, "for their fear will remind them that I am still their princess, still their shield." They began the walk toward the city, their steps steady on the path of ash and stone. Along the way, the princess bent down and picked up a shard of broken metal from the battlefield. It was sharp, jagged, but strong. She held it in her hand, her eyes fierce. "This will be the heart of my new weapon," she said, The human nodded, his voice quiet but approving. Stronger than before, he murmured. When they reached the shattered gates, the city was silent. The survivors looked from the shadows, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had thought her dead, abandoned to fate, yet here she was, standing with fire in her eyes and a human at her side. Whispers filled the streets, whispers of fear, whispers of hope. The human stood tall, his gaze sweeping the crowd, not needing to speak. The princess raised her voice, strong enough to echo through the ruins. "You left me to die," she said, her words sharp as steel. "And yet I live," the people trembled. Some lowering their heads in shame, others staring with awe. "I was broken. My spear shattered, my army gone," she continued. "But the heavens sent me a reminder. Not a god, not a legend, but a human, one who fought when all others fled." Her hand lifted, pointing to the man beside her. "He stood when no one else did. And now I stand again, not because of your loyalty, but because betrayal cannot kill me." The crowd grew restless, guilt and fear mixing with something deeper. For in her voice, they heard not just anger, but unyielding strength. The human remained silent, his presence alone enough to hold the crowd in place. The princess's voice rose higher, filled with fire. "From this day forward, I fight not for those who betrayed me, but for those who still believe in defiance." Her eyes swept across the city, her spirit unbroken. "If you wish to follow, follow. If you wish to run, run. But know this, I will not fall again." A hush fell across the ruins, and slowly, one by one, voices began to rise. Not all, not many, but enough to carry hope like a spark through the ashes. The human stepped closer, his voice low so only she could hear. "They will come for you still," he said. She turned to him, her eyes steady. "Then let them," she replied. "For I no longer stand alone." The dawn broke fully, light spilling across the ruined land. The human and the princess stood together, two figures against a world of enemies and traitors. Not savior and saved, not ruler and protector, but equals bound by pain, by scars, and by defiance. The princess lifted her shard of metal high. The human raised the broken spear beside her. And in that moment, the dawn of defiance began.